All right, so I finally have a build update for you guys for my Poison Blades build. This is the build that I've been running since pretty much when I started the game, when the game launched, basically, right? And now we're into Season 1. We have the Malignant Powers, so the build is even more efficient. It has allowed us to fill in the gaps of certain things that we were missing with this build for it to work against pretty much everything the game has to throw at us, right? So we don't even have to swap gear anymore. We're pretty much using the same Paragon board as before. We're using the same glyphs as before, so we executed what we learned in about 5 or 6 weeks of the preseason, and now we've done it in about a week or so. So we are on our way to hit level 100, and so far nothing has been slowing us down. We can speed run just about any dungeon 10 levels above us, which is pretty easy, but we can also push in nightmare dungeons with exactly the same setup. I may tweak a piece here or there to be more efficient, and against the Uber Lilith fight I may need to tweak a couple more things, but at least the concept continues to work. So you will notice that we've changed a couple things, but it's pretty much the same setup as before. And obviously I want to spend a little bit more time talking about which hearts I've tried so far, so that you guys can have a setup basically for the Poison Blades build going forward for the rest of the Season 1. So all that said, let's jump right into the build. So let me first start by quickly explaining how the build works in case you guys have missed my previous versions of this build. We're still using concealment to walk into a fight stealthed so that we can unleash our combo, which is Poison Trap followed by Death Trap, and then we use the Poison Imbuement along with Twisted Blades to deal our damage. The goal is to obviously kill most enemies within a couple of seconds. If you fail your combo, you may need to exit the battle because some of them will become unstoppable, and then you're at risk of basically dying because we can still get one-shotted in higher tier dungeons. Okay, I'm also even running something that is a little bit more glass cannon, which means I don't have as much survivability as I once did, but that's because they reduced the difficulty of the higher tier dungeons, so I felt I could get away with more damage, which has allowed me, to change one of the specializations. So instead of using combo points, we're back to using preparation. I continue to believe that that is the best specialization to use for speed running. Okay, so overall same concept as before with a couple of tweaks. So let's jump right into the gear and the skills. So here are the total stats at level 95, 7k attack power, 8.2k armor. So that is pretty close to hitting our 85% total DR. The reason we're not at 85% is because we're running an amulet that does not have armor and damage reduction yet. I say yet because I'm still not sure if it is going to be needed or not, but I would continue to run, let's say, the elixir that has the extra armor, the 900 one, or the 500 if you don't have one. But overall, if we were to get that extra armor on our amulet, as well as the potion, and then the extra armor we get from our hearts, combined with the disobedience, we would sit at a 13k total armor, which is roughly 1k from the maximum that is apparently needed for tier 100 dungeons. Okay, again, I don't know that this is needed anymore, so I am trying to run this more offensive amulet for the time being. In fact, this amulet would probably be used for the Uber Lilith fight because you need less survivability. It's just more of a DPS raise. But for now, I've been running it for just about everything. Okay, so speed running, nightmare pushing, and eventually the Uber Lilith fight. So we'll see if I decide to change this, or not in the future. As for the other pieces, it's literally almost the same aspects as before. We have the Umbrus on our helm. We have the Shared Misery on our chest piece, which I continue to believe that is one of the best ones. Then for our gloves, we are now using Infiltrator on the gloves instead. I'll explain why in a second. Same stats as before. Same thing with the pants here. So we already have a pretty good chest piece in terms of armor damage reduction, and same thing with the pants. And then for the boots, we are not using Penitent Greaves. I think this is the biggest difference on the build so far. So the tweak is simply because of this heart right here. So this heart allows us to have all the imbuements at the same time, which means we're getting our chill effect from our cold imbuement without having to use a chill effect from Penitent Greaves. You're probably asking, well, why not just use Penitent Greaves and then get even more chill? It's simple. You freeze enemies fast enough anyway, right? So by not using Penitent Greaves, you free up a slot, right, that you do not need to use an aspect on. And instead, I'm now already using a Shera's Conjar on the build without having to ever swap for anything. And I believe that Conjars or Ashira's Conjar is a better unique than Penitent Greaves for certain reasons. You do get more damage with Penitent Greaves, but the increased attack speed and lucky hit chance at all times can then possibly free up another slot of lucky hit, let's say on your gloves, and instead you could run something else here. Okay, so again, I'm still testing to determine if this is a long-term viable setup, but for now it is working perfectly for everything we need to do. The boots are not exactly perfect. Instead of Shadow Step, we could have damage reduction when injured, for example, but for now I'm using these boots with Shadow Step, which does help for the Uber Lilith fight. But anyway, we'll get back to that once we actually defeat her. As for a crossbow, we already have a pretty good crossbow with our all stats, vulnerable, core, and crit damage. As for the amulet, we just showed it, but weapon mastery, all imbuement, movement speed, I think is a must. So again, this is a fully offensive amulet with the movement speed, but we could go full defensive, for example, right, to make our T100 push a little bit easier. As for the rings, same concept as before. We have basically lucky hit, crit chance, all that good stuff, but then we are still using bursting venoms. As for the other amulet, we're still using retribution, even though it's nerfed. It might not be best in slot anymore, so maybe more testing is needed for this as well. I know, for example, you could run some of the hearts that give you a barrier. Maybe running the extra damage with barrier would be better, but for now this is what I'm using and it's working again just fine. Our weapons, same thing as before, so twisted blades, and it's a decent dagger for the time being, but we would need it to be a little bit better roll for the all stats for it to work nicely with our Paragon points, because we are pushing our total stats as high as possible to make sure we get the benefit of all the rare notes. Okay, leveling up, I tried other hearts. For example, this one right here, I think this was the first one that I got. So the extra attack speed is always nice. Core and basic skills have a chance to fully restore your primary resource. This was very good early on, especially when we didn't have a lot of lucky hit, which we are kind of relying on now to generate more resource. So I think for a while I did run Inner Sight, but overall I don't think that this is the ideal one to use, because when you're fighting bosses you kind of never know which buff you're going to have, right? Eventually I think I got even another one, and I kept using it because this was literally the only thing that I had. So if you have nothing else, then by all means use this one, because it is good, right, to some extent. As for the other hearts, we did try Shadow Decoy. I liked this one for a while. In fact, I really enjoyed it in the beginning, up until I had Shared Misery. The simple reason is that Shared Misery will allow you to kind of lock up an entire screen of mobs, and Shadow Decoy kind of did the same thing. However, in the long run, Shadow Decoy worked against you if you are using Concealment, right? So Concealment will trigger a Shadow Decoy where you trigger your Concealment, and if you're too close to mobs, you will aggro them, which means they'll be moving away from staying in a little bunched up pack, so that when you want to drop your poison trap right under them to trigger your vulnerable, it didn't work, right? It would cause a couple of issues. So eventually I dropped it, again, because I think Shared Misery does the same thing. I eventually got another one, so again, I kept using it while leveling, right? I think it was great. This one here was also decent. But the extra stun, we don't need it all that much, because we already stun with our exposure passive, we slow, and then we freeze. So I just felt like it was redundant, and in some cases might even push the mobs to be unbreakable even faster, right? So I decided to also drop this one and kind of settled with these two right here, which is the Suppress, which is fantastic if the Suppress is working like I think it is, which is almost a 20% damage reduction if I understand correctly. We don't really care about the explosion damage, but overall the extra damage you get from this one, if, like I said, you have enough crit rate for it to be worth it, is great, and then along with this one. As for the other Wrathful Hearts, there's also this one right here, which seems very interesting. I will need to do more testing against, I believe Uber Lilith will be the best place to test between this one and this one. Which one actually ends up giving more DPS, maybe you guys already know, do let us know. But I don't want to just keep swapping hearts, so I'm kind of waiting for another amulet to just put it on so I can keep doing more testing for you guys. Then there's also the Barber. Now the barber is a weird one. I think it's good. Sometimes I think it's not. It looks like it's causing a little bit of issues when we're fighting mobs. If somebody else wears it, you kind of see the effect, right? And I feel like that with the poison imbuement, there's something that doesn't seem right. Maybe it's just because it's delaying and the damage, and then it's all triggering at the same time, but it just didn't feel as good, for example, as using this one. Okay, so for now, because I'm mostly pushing nightmare dungeons, or speed running them, sorry, I feel like this one is the best overall, simply because of everything that I just explained. Okay, and then for the other heart, immune is always nice. This might be good for PvP. I don't feel like I really need it for anything that I'm doing right now. Barrier, well, we don't generate barrier, so I don't think this really works for us. Then this one right here, I didn't really try all that much, didn't seem needed. We've got this one here, which again doesn't do much for us. Fire damage, we don't really use that. This one I did try a little bit, immediately changed it, because knocking back enemies with your marksman skills when you're trying to group them up with your death trap just doesn't work, right? You're literally working against yourself. So I don't recommend this one at all. Then this is obviously the best one. So we got a better roll here. I'm waiting for kind of like even better rings to eventually put it in. This one right here didn't seem to do anything for us really. I briefly tried it. I heard something about this working with the barber and doing something, and some kind of synergy, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, I didn't really test this, so maybe you guys know more. The extra stun grenades, same concept as the extra stun from this one. I don't really feel like we need the extra stun, right? Because of shared misery, we're walking in, the first guy we stun, we have a chance to spread that to everyone, and then we're good to go. And finally, this one right here, yeah, we're not really using or needing to use life, sorry. So again, this one I don't think is the best. So for now, this is what I settle with. It's pretty much exactly the same as before, except for 2 tweaks that we've done in here. So number one is we've put 3 points into trap mastery. So we're not even using debilitating toxins, because again, pushing in higher tier dungeons is now not as hard. So I feel like we don't need as much survivability. So again, maybe more tweaking is needed for this to be optimal. But the idea here is to try and get even more crit rate, right? So that we can benefit from the heart that we just covered. We could also put 3 points into precision imbuement. Either we take some points from poison imbuement, for example, or we could even try to drop siphoning strikes, because now we have enough lucky hit with our Shayla's Conjar. We could maybe drop the lucky hit on our gloves to instead get the modifier that gives us life on lucky hit, right? Which is a better value than siphoning strikes. So perhaps that would allow us to take those 3 points and put them into precision imbuement. But again, more testing is needed for this. Quickly about the specialization, like I said before, preparation continues to be my favorite one for speed running, or even now pushing to reset our combos even faster, so that we can kind of cycle through our combo in the middle of a fight and clear an entire pack of mobs a little bit easier. Combo points would still be my preferred one for, let's say, the Uber Lilith fight. And finally, the Paragon points, it's the same boards as before, but now we've built it from the ground up, in the sense that we were leveling as we were doing this, so it was a little bit different. I did notice that I did not push as quickly in my Paragon boards as I once did before. I instead kind of focused on getting to my first glyph and then getting a few of the rare nodes, even the legendary node, before moving on. Simply because, you know, if you don't get the benefit for the additional bonuses, the question was, would it be simply better to focus on the extra rare nodes? I also reorganized the boards slightly. So we started with Tricks of the Trade, followed by Deadly Ambush, followed by Cheap Shot, all right? And these are the ones where we have the most amount of points anyway, and so that made it so I didn't need as much stats early on to fully benefit, from these rare nodes. And then after that, we have the Cunning Stratagem, which we're kind of only passing through to eventually finish in the Eldritch Bounty, sorry. And as you can see here, like, you know, we're not even close on hitting our maximum amount of strength to fully benefit from this node. Okay, so that's the concept behind it. As for the glyphs, they're pretty much the same as before. We have Turf, although this could be exploit for speed running. This would help you apply AoE vulnerable, which might make it even faster, because if you don't use exploit, you have to rely on your concealment and your initial poison trap to do your AoE vulnerable. All right, but if you don't want to do that, then you can run exploit, as you don't need the extra survivability anyway from turf. But then for the rest of them, it's pretty much the same. We have Bane, we have efficacy, and then we've got control, combat, and in the starter board we've got closer. All right, so that's the gist of it, of the poison blades in season 1. I want to know what you guys think about the build, the updated version of it. Is there anything that I missed? You guys have any tips and tricks for us that we can implement for this to be even more efficient? As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.